Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about the plant-based meat, and in particular, the impossible meat or the impossible burger that we all have been hearing about on the media, and whether this kind of meat is good or bad for you. By the end of this video, you'll be able to make that judgment for yourself. Now, let's start the video. So meat made out of plant, it is nothing new. In fact, the plant-based meat has been around for more than decades. In fact, there were two companies actually came out with the plant-based meat dated all the way back in the late 1980s. I'm sure you will know their name when I say their name. So one company is called Kellogg. They are a multinational food manufacturer famously known for their cereal. And the other company is Kraft Heinz, and they are known for their ketchup. Both of these companies have been manufacturing the veggie meat for almost roughly 40 years now, and they are still coming out with new plant-based food every so often. And in fact, you can still find their plant-based meat in most of the local grocery store right at the frozen section at aisle 26. And just look out for the name Boca Burger, which owned by Kraft Heinz, and Kellogg's Morningstar Farm, or the Garden Burger. Unfortunately, these veggie meat alternatives came out by these two companies never become mainstream due to the fact that the taste just never live up to the actual taste of real meat. And people are actually able to taste the mushroom and the soybean in each bite. And judging from some of the reaction videos that I've seen on YouTube, this plant-based meat can only mimic the meat texture, but it's still millions miles away from being taste like the real meat. And it's like drinking a soda and later realize you just got pranked and actually drinking soy sauce. The feeling of betrayal. So, fast forward 3 decades later, in 2009, Beyond Meat was founded, and Impossible Food Company came out 2 years later in 2011. Both companies were set out to create a revolutionary plant-based meat. And this time, not only the texture will be similar, but also the meat iron bloody taste of real meat will also be similar too. The way they were able to achieve the meaty taste is actually quite interesting, and it all lies inside the magnificence of science. Yay! According to research study from the Impossible Company, heme is an essential iron-containing molecule in blood found in all animal muscle tissues, which is responsible for carrying oxygen throughout our body. And it is also responsible for the meat having the iron bloody taste. As Patrick Brown so eloquently puts it, the craving for meat that most of us often have is essentially the craving for heme. Heme. So, heme is not only can be extracted from the animal blood, but heme can also be found in the roots of soybeans, beets, and many fruits like apple. But to expedite heme production from a plant at a much scalable pace, the Impossible Company takes the DNA from these soybeans plant and then insert them into a genetically engineered yeast to undergo a fermentation process to make the heme at a much faster pace. And this process has been approved by the FDA, and it is very similar to the fermentation process used to make beer that we often drink. But Beyond Meat, on the other hand, does not use the genetically modified approach like the Impossible Company, and they rely on the fruits and plants such as beets and apple for the heme iron that gives the meaty taste. But the study suggests that the iron from animal heme is much easier for our body to absorb than the plant-based iron. So the Beyond Meat added the vitamin C in their meat to make their meat more absorbable in our body. So here's one interesting story about the Impossible Company. When they first debuted their revolutionary plant-based meat at an upscale restaurant in New York and California, and with the company mission to reduce carbon footprint, reduce natural resources consumption, and the overall environmental impact. Climate change type of stuff. And at the time, the company was highly regarded by the media, but the positive news coverage did not last long until the company started to face criticism when Burger King and many fast food chains adopted their plant-based meat in 2016 as one of the menu options. But based on what I have seen so far, the main criticism has always been revolving around the idea of heavily processed food associated with the fast food image, and therefore the plant-based meat is bad for you. But whether or not the plant-based meat is good or bad for our body, I think we all can make a better judgment if we objectively look at the nutrition value together. So if we compare the same 4-ounce serving of Impossible and real ground beef, here are some of the positive and negative notes on the Impossible meat. The positive for the Impossible meats are it contains less fat, less cholesterol, high dietary fiber, and high daily value of added vitamin and mineral. But also keep in mind that the vitamin and mineral in the Impossible meat are actually added nutrients, unlike the natural nutrient found in the real ground beef. Now, the negative for the Impossible meat are it has high sodium and high carbohydrates. But so I guess I don't have to add salt to my Impossible meat, and I'll probably have to get rid of the buns to offset the carbohydrate when I eat a plant-based burger. Now, the daily value of the protein content is, I'll say, is pretty on par with the real ground beef. Judging by the comparison, the Impossible meat may outperform the real meat in certain aspects, such as nutrient, but with some shortcoming of high sodium and high carbohydrate. But I believe they can be easily offset by adding less salt or choosing a bun that with less carbohydrate, or just add less seasoning or sauce. However, I think the debate will always boil down to between an over-processed plant-based meat versus a natural meat come from an animal. Now I know what you're thinking. When you mix the word science, genetic, and food together within the same context, it often draws a criticism on health concern. So the Impossible meat may sound a bit unappetizing given the fact that it is processed and genetically engineered. But in reality, many things that we eat today that we may not be aware of are either heavily processed or a GMO. Majority of the animals that we consume are injected with antibiotic to help reduce disease and fed with hormone to induce growth. And the fruits and vegetables were crossbreed and genetically engineered in the laboratory to improve nutrient, boost sugar content to enhance its taste, and increase tolerance from drought, and to prevent insect, hence reduce the use of pesticide. Some of these laboratory enhancements can be good, but can potentially have a long-term side effect in our health. And yet, we all eat them anyway because they taste good and convenient. In my honest opinion, the human being has been eating real meat for thousands of years. But this revolutionary plant-based alternative meat has only been around 3 years tops, and they're at such infancy stage that the data is still insufficient to judge whether eating this alternative meat will have a long-term side effect. Only time will tell if the impact on our body is beneficial or detrimental in the long run. But one benefit that most people seem to agree upon with this plant-based meat is the potential to reduce carbon footprint and decrease natural resources usage such as land, water, and the crops that it requires to raise enough cattle to satisfy our current and future meat consumption. The reality is that meat production is so extremely insufficient, meaning that the amount of resources that it requires to feed the livestock is far greater than the amount of meat that we can get out of them. Now, the feed conversion ratio measures the amount of feedstock required to produce a unit of edible meat. And we will discuss more on this topic coming up. Research shows that the FCR of a chicken is about 5, which means that it requires 5 pounds of crop to generate 1 pound of chicken. And pork has an FCR roughly 10, and cow is about 25. A whopping 25 pounds worth of stuff needs to be fed to a cow to get 1 pound worth of beef out of it. And in terms of other natural resources, we're also using 1/3 of our freshwater source on Earth to feed all the livestock that we eat. To put that in perspective, eating one burger is equivalent to consume 10-day worth of water for showering. And another good example would be a pound of meat can feed an individual for a meal, but a 25-pound worth of crops that we use to generate that single pound of beef could have feed 20 individuals for a meal. Now, I know what you're thinking. Let's just hold the horses for a little bit. I'm not saying that we should eat the crop that we use to feed the livestock, especially not the things that us humans cannot digest, like the hay that we feed to the cows. What I'm simply implying is that the land that we use to grow the crops for the livestock could have been used to grow fruits and vegetables that we normally consume. According to National Food and Agriculture Organization, approximately 20% of the habitable landmass in the world are used to raise the livestock, and roughly 30% of the arable land is utilized for cultivating crops to feed those livestock. And with the exponential growth in human population and the growing demand for meat consumption per capita, it is very likely that we will eventually run out of land to satisfy our appetite. If we ever reach that point, I believe that the meat is going to become so expensive that an average people will not be able to afford it for every meal. And that will naturally drive down the meat consumption. Or another possibility scenario is that the meat will become so unhealthy as scientists discover some super hormone to super boost the livestock growth. Either way, it's a lose-lose situation for us as consumers. I'm neither advocating for or against the alternative meat, but I think it is one of the many solutions that will contribute to a more sustainable future environmentally. That's enough serious talk. Here in front of me are the 5 burger patties. One of them is the Impossible Meat, Beyond Meat, Boca, and the Morning Star. And last but not least, the real beef burger with 80% lean and 20% fat. In the next episode, we're going to have a tasting experiment to see which one has the closest taste to the real thing. If you would like to see our tasting experiment, make sure to stay tuned to my channel by subscribing and turn on the notification bell icon so you won't miss a single video in the future, or just click on one of the video suggestions. By the way, fun fact, Bill Gates is one of the major investors of the Impossible brand. And Beyond Meat is now a public traded company for those of who are interested in trading stock by into a company that will be producing the meat of the future. You may ask why are these information so important? They're not, just fun fact. See you soon in the next episode.